In July 2025, a silent storm is brewing across the U.S. Canada border. But this isn't a military standoff or a political war of words. It's something more subtle, more calculated. Canada, once America's closest travel partner and cultural mirror, is turning away. The travel boycott began as a quiet protest. Now it's escalated into a full-blown economic and diplomatic freeze. Flights are down. Road crossings have slowed. Canadian tourism to the U.S. is plunging at historic levels. And American destinations from small border towns to global cities are feeling the sting. This isn't just about politics. It's personal. Millions of Canadians who once vacationed in Florida, California, New York, and Nevada are now staying home. Or worse, from America's point of view, they're going elsewhere. To Europe, to Asia, to Latin America. Anywhere but the United States. It didn't start this way. For decades, Canadians made up one of the largest groups of foreign visitors to the U.S. every winter. Snowbirds would flock to the Sunbelt, injecting billions into local economies. Canadian students filled U.S. universities. Families crossed the border for concerts, shopping, and sports. But in 2025, that bond is breaking. The first signs came when Ottawa issued new travel advisories for its citizens visiting the United States. The warnings didn't sound dramatic at first. But they struck a nerve. Rising gun violence, increasing reports of racial profiling at border checkpoints, and what Canadian officials called an unpredictable civil climate inside America. Then came the visa delays. Canadians applying for work and study permits in the U.S. began facing months-long backlogs. Business travelers were rerouted. Artists and performers canceled tours. Canadian athletes, some headed to U.S. training camps, were suddenly stuck in limbo. What looked like a bureaucratic slowdown turned into a diplomatic rift. Ottawa accused Washington of discrimination and arbitrary enforcement. Washington shrugged, citing internal processing changes and national security concerns. Behind closed doors, however, officials knew the implications were deeper. Canada's Prime Minister didn't go on television to denounce the U.S. Instead, he made a move far more damaging. He quietly pulled government-sponsored trips, discouraged educational exchanges, and redirected major cultural events to Europe. The impact was immediate. Major Canadian universities froze partnerships with their U.S. counterparts. Cross-border internships were scrapped. High schools canceled field trips to Washington and New York. Even provincial governments stopped sending delegations to American conferences. Tourism took the biggest hit. In January 2024, over 4.5 million Canadians visited the U.S. That number has now dropped by 41% in 2025. Hotels in Orlando, Las Vegas, and New York City, cities heavily dependent on Canadian tourists, are reporting mass cancellations. Some resorts have slashed staff. Others have begun courting European and Latin American travelers to fill the void. In Buffalo, New York, just across from Ontario, mall traffic is down 60%. Businesses that once catered to day-tripping Canadians are shuttering. Restaurants near the border are offering steep discounts just to survive. It's a mirror image across Washington State, Michigan, and Minnesota. But the boycott isn't just about tourism. Canada has also suspended joint travel initiatives, including shared airport security pre-clearance programs. This means longer wait times, fewer direct flights, and less convenience for anyone crossing the northern border. For the airline industry, the consequences are severe. Several carriers have cut routes between U.S. and Canadian cities. Regional airports are losing revenue. Pilots are being reassigned. Layoffs are quietly underway. In 2025, air connectivity between Canada and the U.S. has dropped to its lowest level since the pandemic recovery period of 2021. The financial toll is climbing into the billions. Florida, one of the top destinations for Canadian tourists, could lose an estimated $2.3 billion this year alone. Arizona and California aren't far behind. And the ripple effects extend beyond hotels and restaurants. Real estate agents, golf courses, tour operators, and even health clinics catering to seasonal Canadian residents are suffering. But what triggered this unraveling? Much of it comes down to policy shifts and pride. When President Trump returned to power in 2025, he reignited a wave of nationalistic rhetoric. One of his early executive orders tightened border entry protocols even for trusted traveler nations like Canada. Random vehicle searches increased. Surveillance technology expanded. And new entry fee proposals for foreign vehicles sparked outrage in Ottawa. Then came the political friction. Trump's administration cut funding for joint U.S. Canada infrastructure projects, including cross-border bridges and high-speed rail proposals. Canadian leaders interpreted this as a deliberate snub, especially since similar projects with Mexico were still moving forward. Ottawa responded with a travel warning. Then a slow, deliberate boycott. Now it's becoming a structural shift. Canadian travel influencers, news outlets, and celebrities are publicly promoting domestic-first vacationing. The hashtag Stay in Canada has gained over 12 million uses. Major travel blogs have released lists of U.S. alternatives, featuring Montreal instead of New York, Banff instead of Yellowstone, and Victoria instead of Seattle. A recent Ipsos poll revealed that 63% of Canadians now feel unwelcome in the U.S. and would prefer to vacation elsewhere. That number was just 19% in 2019. But it's not just about perception. It's about politics. The Canadian government recently struck new tourism and education deals with the EU, Australia, and South Korea, specifically targeting markets traditionally dominated by the U.S. Canadian airports are being upgraded to become global travel hubs. International visa programs are being streamlined. The message is clear. Canada doesn't need to rely on its southern neighbor anymore. Back in the U.S., local leaders are begging for intervention. Mayors in Florida and Nevada have written directly to the White House urging the administration to restore trust with Canadian travelers. Business groups in the Midwest are calling for border diplomacy summits. So far, Washington's response has been muted. Behind the scenes, officials acknowledge that the boycott is real and growing. But reversing it isn't simple. It requires more than speeches. It demands policy change, diplomatic outreach, and a toning down of nationalist rhetoric. In the meantime, the rift deepens. Canadian snowbirds are buying homes in Portugal and Spain. Canadian students are enrolling in universities in the Netherlands and Ireland. Canadian businesses are setting up second offices in Tokyo and Berlin instead of New York and San Francisco. America is no longer the default destination. And the cultural impact is enormous. Cross-border concerts, comedy tours, and film festivals have seen a 38% drop in Canadian participation. U.S. TV networks are seeing lower viewership from Canadian audiences. Streaming platforms are being pressured to geofence content due to licensing breakdowns caused by the boycott. Even sports are affected. Canadian teams in joint North American leagues are now facing complications with travel visas, sponsorships, and scheduling. Tensions are rising between U.S. and Canadian fanbases online. What used to be playful rivalry is hardening into cultural resentment. There's also a growing generational divide. Younger Canadians, especially those in Gen Z and Gen Alpha, are less likely to have nostalgic ties to the United States. They've grown up with alternatives, streaming Korean dramas, vacationing in Iceland, studying in Germany. America is no longer the dream, it's just one option among many. And right now it's the least popular. Diplomats warn that if the U.S. doesn't act soon, the rift could become permanent. The 49th parallel, once one of the friendliest borders in the world, is now becoming a political fault line. And travel, the most human of connections, is bearing the brunt. There is a path to recovery. But it requires trust, dialogue, and above all, respect. Until then, the boycott continues. And America watches uneasily as its oldest neighbor quietly walks away.